later?
The Fed is selling bonds to every bank, so they're going through an inflationary gap and they want to take some money out of the economy. So the first thing they do is sell the bonds to the bank, and the bank has no choice but to take it out of their excess reserves and give it to the Fed because they don't have any other money on hand. So they do that, and when they do that, the money supply goes down by $100 in all the banking systems. When you calculate 4,900, the 5,000 minus 100, and multiply it by the reserve requirement, you get 980. And that means that they're still missing $80 in their excess reserves. So they come over here and start selling off their government securities, and they sell off $80 worth. The Fed, or the reserves they have on hand right now, is $900, and they take the 80 out that they owed before, and their new total is 4,820, but they still need $64 if you calculate the reserve requirement with this 4,820. They still need $64. So that process goes on, and they keep taking it out of their government securities because it's the easiest to liquidate. And eventually it'll add up to $400, which is the money multiplier times this initial excess reserve, or negative excess reserve. So by the time you get to $400, both T accounts are at 4,500, and notice that the reserve requirement 0.2 times 4,500 is $900. So they're set. For the Fed buying bonds from the public, they're trying to pump money into the system during a recession. So what they do is just basically give the banks $100, and that $100 starts going through their system. They take 20%, if the reserve requirement is 0.2, they take 20% of that and add it to the reserve requirement, and that's $20. And then they have $80 left out of the 100 the Fed gave them. So both these accounts are at 5,100, and they have an excess reserve of $80. So they come over here and invest it in corporations. And when these corporations get the investment, they go spend it on factories, tools, machinery, and somebody else gets that check of $80. So now you have 5,000 plus 100 plus 80. And you have to take 20% again of that $80 and add it to your reserve requirement, because the reserve requirement isn't changing. And after that process is done, you have $64 in excess reserves. And it continues until everything in excess goes to zero, and eventually corporations will have another $400 to add to their investments. This will be $1,000 plus 100, which is this 500 extra dollars times the reserve requirement, which is 0.2. So you have 1,100 in there, you have 1,400 in here, and that's 5,500, and they both add up. And if you take 0.2 of 5,500, it would be 1,100, and that's how you know you're done.
Awesome.
For raising the reserve requirement, you lay out your initial T account, as always, and you go ahead and raise it to 0.21. And this 0.21 means that you're short $50 in your reserve requirement now. So you don't have that money on hand, so you have to borrow it from somebody. And for the most part, this borrowing is bank to bank, and that's when the federal funds rate applies. So this $50 goes to the Fed, and that $50 was taken out of the economy somewhere, and so the bank's all-around money is now 4,950. So you take 21% of that and you realize that you're still short $39.50. So now the banks need to start selling off government securities to make up for it. And they sell off the $50 in securities to make up for the initial $50, but now they have another $39.50 that they need to borrow. So they have this $39.50 and they repeat the process by subtracting it from somebody else, borrowing it out, and then paying it back with government securities that they're selling. So that process goes on until you eventually reach $5,000 minus $238.10, which is the total value of changing the reserve requirement. And when you take 0.21 of this final number, you should get 1,000. And your excess reserves should be 0. And you just want to make sure that this number right here is 1,000 minus this number, 1,000 minus 238.10. For lowering the reserve requirement, the Fed is basically giving money back to the bank by initially lowering this reserve requirement, which gives them an extra $50. And that $50 then gets invested over here into corporations, and you have a new balance of $5,050. So once you invest that into corporations, the $50 becomes somebody else's money. Corporations go out and buy factories, tools, and machinery, and that becomes somebody else's checks, which gets deposited into the banking system. So then you take 0.19 again of this $5,050, and you see that it equals $950. So you add another $950 to the reserve requirement, but that leaves you with $40.50 of the total $50. And you repeat the process and add it again, this excess, into investment. So you're giving it and investing it into corporations again. That becomes somebody else's check, so you add it to the other side. And you go on and on until it gets to 0. And at the end here, you should have $263.16. And you should make sure that this was 1,000 plus $263.16. You also need to make sure that 0.19 of this number, $5,263.16, equals 1,000. That way, your excess reserves will be 0. All of your money will be invested into corporations, and you will have met the reserve requirement.